At the edge of a vast desert where golden dunes glimmer beneath a searing sun, stood an immense structure carved into sandstone cliffs. In this otherworldly version of ancient Egypt, each symbol etched into the towering walls radiated a faint glow, evidence of the living hieroglyphs that silently guarded its secrets. Inside the building, chambers overran with scrolls, tablets, and time-worn papyri. Long ago, the gods had gifted the ancients with a relic that turned their letters and pictographs into living entities, each capable of conscious thought and collective defense. The sacred library, as it was known, served as both a sanctuary for knowledge and a battleground between powers who sought to control the written word. Because in this realm, the difference between scribbled figures and conscious beings was only a stroke of a papyrus quill. A young acolyte named Amori had dedicated her life to the study of these living glyphs. From childhood, she had been able to discern the whispery voices tumbling from the hieroglyphic carvings when others heard only silence. The keepers of the library took note of her gift and welcomed her into their inner circle, initiating her in rituals that revealed the library's deeper truths. She learned that every hieroglyph had a name, a personality, and a place in an interlocking puzzle meant to preserve the continuum of time and stories. Some glyphs embodied guardian spirits, while others bore powers over nature, influencing wind, sand, and even the minds of careless intruders. These vibrant characters dwelt within the library's walls, stepping forth from their stony confines when called upon or when threatened by outside forces. News of approaching danger broke the library's silence one midday as fine dust clouds formed on the horizon. Nomads who roamed beyond the dunes reported a fierce warband led by a rogue scribe named Hazimen, exiled scholar consumed by the desire to harness the living glyph's magic. Hazim had once been a disciple of the library himself, but grew resentful when the keepers refused his requests to choose one particular glyph for destructive ends. Seeking power above all else, he had stolen fragments of knowledge and begun forging abominations of writing, twisted glyphs that merged scraps of unholy texts and monstrous shapes. These malformed sigils existed outside the natural order. They commanded malevolent energies that threatened every living glyph they encountered. With each conquest, Hazim's collection of twisted runes grew, and now his eyes were set on breaching the sacred library's gates. As the warband advanced, the keepers summoned the entire assembly of glyphs to convene in the Great Hall, where enormous pillars rose like petrified lotus stems. Amori accompanied Master Kenem, the eldest librarian, whose bent frame and quiet voice belied a long lifetime of knowledge. At his command, the hieroglyphs emerged from the inscriptions around them, with faces reminiscent of falcons, lions, or serpents, shimmering with the ancient might of the gods. They gathered. Twisting lines beneath their luminous forms revealed thread-like connections to the library's walls, as if each glyph remained tethered to the source of its life. Master Kenem addressed them. Hazim approaches with his brood of twisted runes. This library is their target. If they defile our archives, all knowledge entrusted by the gods could be corrupted or lost. We must mount our defense. A hush settled over the hall, and even the faint torches along the walls seemed to hold their breath. Amori felt the rumble of silent determination to protect their shared home radiating from each guardian glyph. Suddenly, the floor beneath them vibrated as the library awakened. Columns rumbled and inscriptions across the walls took shape. Massive hieroglyphic creatures, once bound to the tapestry of stone, emerged in regal splendor. Some bore the regal visage of Ra, crowned by the solar disk. Others carried the cunning appearance of Thoth, with the head of an ibis. Among them were smaller glyphs that resembled crocodiles or jackals, each gliding along the floor on shimmering legs of pure light. Overhead, swirling eddies of radiant symbols formed protective canopies in the air. After centuries of quiet vigilance, the library's sentinels stood ready. Outside, winds whipped the sand into swirling devils as Hazim's warband pressed forward. At his command slithered the monstrous runes he had conjured, twisted parodies of the truly sacred glyphs. They crawled and writhed across the dunes, leaving behind dark, smoking trails on the ground. In place of elegant lines, their bodies seemed carved by ragged scars, glowing with an infernal red hue. Hazim, robed in black with golden cords, lifted a staff topped by an unholy symbol. "This library," he cried, his voice heavy with obsession and fury, "shall become an instrument of unimaginable power. The old ways have done nothing but shackle us to tired traditions. Through the might of these living glyphs, I shall reshape the realm itself." Before long, the warband confronted the outer wards surrounding the library. Great monoliths dotted the desert floor, each inscribed with protective spells. Living hieroglyphs sprang from these monoliths, forming shimmering barriers of protective energy. It was the first line of defense, meant to slow any aggressor. Hazim laughed through gritted teeth when he saw the twisting wards. With a flick of his staff, he summoned his twisted runes to attack the monoliths. Red, serpentine glyphs that coiled around the stones, draining the wards in a sickly pall of red and black. Traces of ominous runic scrawl spread like a plague, cracks forming in the once impenetrable monoliths. One finally shattered, sending a column of dust and gravel into the air. Inside the library, panic threatened to take hold when the keepers witnessed the initial breach. Yet Master Kenem remained calm, focusing on how best to direct his living glyph forces. He knew that if Hazim managed to corrupt the outer monoliths, the final stand would soon take place within the library itself. He stationed a squad of lion-headed glyphs at the looming bronze gates, tasked with repelling any direct assault. Others those in the shape of wings or swirling air currents. He deployed to the parapets, from which they could unleash aerial counters. The corridors of the library were guarded by steadfast glyphs shaped like jackals, hyenas, or desert cats, known for their cunning and stealthy expertise in ambush. And at the heart of it all, Amori's gift in speaking to the glyphs allowed her to coordinate from chamber to chamber. When the twisted runes finally broke through the now crumbling ring of monoliths, Hazim's warband let out a thunderous roar. They surged forward, expecting to crush the library's defenses, but the living glyphs poured forth, gliding through the air like luminous spirits. A savage clash erupted beneath the midday sun. Golden lion-headed glyphs leaped into the monstrous red runes, each collision sending sparks of arcane energy across the battlefield. Howling gusts of wind erupted from a flock of ibis-headed glyphs who conjured cyclones to divert the invaders. At times, victory seemed close for the defenders as they repelled wave after wave of runic assaults. But the twisted runes did not falter. Their corruption spread like a malignant disease, infecting the glyphs forced into close contact. Mori felt her heart sink as she saw a once regal falcon-headed glyph twist in agony, lines contorting into a hideous shape before collapsing into black dust. Driven by a fierce determination, Amori refused to watch the library fall. She gathered a small band of glyphs known for their power of restoration, glyphs representing healing serpents, ankhs and flowing waters. Together, they dashed through the swirling chaos of war. When they found a wounded guardian, they knelt and conjured shimmering orbs of emerald light, reversing the corruption clinging to their comrades. Yet there was a limit to how much they could cure at once. For the twisted runes' assault continued relentlessly. Every success was met with another rush of monstrous glyphs that threatened to overrun the defenders. Towering plumes of red smoke rose from the sands, and the smell of scorched papyrus hung in the scorching air. Nori could not let her hope slip away. She recalled a lesson Master Kenem had once taught her in a hushed corridor of the library. True power came not from brute force, but from a profound synergy of souls. Perhaps, she reasoned, the living glyphs and their keepers could merge their efforts in a single focused incantation to strike at Hazim's corruption at its source. Gathering her courage, she raced up the steps to the highest battlement where Master Kenem stood surveying the battlefield. "Master," she said through hoarse breath, "we have to find the keystone of Hazim's unholy magic. If we can draw out the twisted rune's source, perhaps we can sever his hold on them." Master Keenum's eyes shone with an unexpected vigor. He raised a trembling finger to the staff Hazim brandished. "That staff, it is crafted from the stolen fragments of our own stolen papyri, bound together with a necrotic binding. That is how Hazim spawns and controls his abominations. Break the staff, and we may have a chance at cleansing the twisted runes." Though the plan seemed simple, the challenge would be immense. Surrounded by twisted runes and his elite warband, Hazim guarded the staff as if it were his very life. Yet Master Keenum entrusted Amory with an emerald amulet etched with the Eye of Horus, an artifact that amplified the healing powers of living glyphs. Wasting no time, Amory rallied a small force of guardians. At her side strode a majestic, lion-headed glyph named Meret, rumored to embody portions of the god Sekhmet's divine wrath. Also joining them was Amunet, an ibis-headed glyph descended from Thoth's wisdom. The small band wove through the carnage. Dust-laden winds swirled with blasts of arcane sparks, and the roars of glyphs locked in deadly combat reverberated across the desert. Hazim's presence became palpable as they drew near, a nauseating aura emanating from the staff. From the staff's tip issued crawling filaments of red energy that latched onto glyphs and siphoned their life force. The Merit lunged toward the staff, only to be repelled by a violent shock of crackling magic. Amunet frantically waved her wings of shimmering ink, forming a protective shield that drenched the searing arcs in golden light. With her own voice trembling but resolute, Amunet raised the emerald amulet, calling upon every ounce of healing essence the library's guardians could spare. Emerald sparks fluttered like elusive fireflies, surrounding the staff in a glowing aura. Hazim hissed, taken off guard by the concentrated burst of energy. For a moment, his twisted runes faltered, as if an invisible hand momentarily blocked their corruption. "You dare use your feeble healing magic against me!" Hazim spat, flinging out a vortex of black flame from the staff's tip. The wave of darkness crashed against Amunet's shield, forcing her to kneel in exhaustion. But Meret, invigorated by the healing aura, pounced again, claws splayed wide. This time, the staff cracked under the line glyph's blow, exposing fibrous lines of stolen inscriptions beneath its surface. Emery saw her chance. She placed the amulet's glowing face upon the fracture, reciting an incantation she had learned from the oldest texts. White-hot flashes exploded across the battlefield. The staff shattered with a piercing crack, and shards of cursed papyri burst into the air. Freed from the unholy tether, the twisted runes screamed as they lost their cohesion, their lines bending and flaking away into fragments. One by one they collapsed into inert scribbles in the sand, seared by the intensity of the healing aura. Hazim recoiled, stumbling back with a wild look in his eyes. "No!" he shouted, voice trembling with rage and horror. All around him the monstrous runes he had summoned dissipated, no longer bound to his will. Whatever unholy whispers had fueled his power evaporated in the blazing brilliance. However, the battle was not yet over. The library's defenders had to contend with the handful of twisted runes that clung stubbornly to life, and Hazim himself was far from subdued. With his staff destroyed, Hazim raised his arms, chanting incantations in an archaic tongue. Purple-cloaked illusions spun around him, forming the shape of an enormous serpent-like figure carved from black smoke, a final attempt to overwhelm the defenders by summoning raw shadow magic. Amuri grimaced in fear, for shadow magic lay beyond the living glyph's typical domain. Emboldened, Meret and Amunet launched themselves at the swirling phantom, tearing at the ephemeral coils, yet each time they struck, they found only smoky mirages. Hazim's laughter echoed across the desert, ragged and tinged with desperation. "You have undone my runes, but you cannot slay the shadows within me." Amori closed her eyes and recalled everything she had learned about synergy between guardians and mortal keepers. The living glyphs could be guided by one who truly understood their hearts. If Hazim's final conjuration drew its power from shadows and illusions, a unified chant might dispel it. Steadying her breath, she invoked the ancient language. In the name of the written word, let the hieroglyphic spirits gather and illuminate the darkness. From the battered library soared dozens of glyphs who answered her call. Their bodies glimmered in gold, turquoise, and obsidian, forming a radiant circle around Hazim's conjured serpent. In unison, they glowed brighter, forging a ring of light, unable to feed on darkness that no longer existed. The black serpent fell to wisps, leaving Hazim momentarily exposed. Merit lunged, pinning Hazim to the sand with outstretched claws. The exiled scribe's eyes flared with hate and fear. No longer able to hide behind illusions or monstrous runes, he gasped for breath, the swirling aura of shadow dissipating. Master Keenum arrived with a retinue of library keepers, chains inscribed with specialized binding spells in hand. Together, they recited incantations that contained Hazim's magic, preventing any further dark conjurations. He was subdued at last, left with nothing but the shattered remains of his ambitions. In the quiet aftermath, the defenders turned their attention to the living glyphs, wounded or partially corrupted during the fighting. Many had suffered grievous injuries from the twisted runes, and some had even faded to dust on the battlefield. And the Mori worked alongside Master Kiam and a circle of healing serpents to restore those they could save. The sandstone courtyard leading to the library's entrance became an impromptu triage camp where fragments of battered glyphs gathered for solace. While they tended to the wounded, a heavy sense of sorrow hung in the air. The library had triumphed, yet the cost was visible in the chipped edges of graven images and the fading glow within certain once vibrant eyes. As day turned to dusk, an amber twilight spread across the desert. A hush fell as the orange sky melted into starlit purple. The battered monoliths at the perimeter were being repaired by a cadre of architects and scribes, guided by the living glyphs whose powers could help restore broken stone and reanimate wards. Inside the library, the keepers carried Hazim through winding corridors into a hidden prison chamber where wards prevented even the slightest whisper of dark magic. It was a place seldom used, reflecting how rare the betrayal against the sacred library's mission had become. Yet, as Master Keenum remarked, a library must preserve all, even those who would misuse its gifts. In the grand hall, Amuri and her closest companions assembled to reflect on the events. The high vaults of the ceiling flickered with torchlight, revealing etched depictions of long-forgotten epics. The greatest of the guardians stood beside the keepers, their forms still faintly aglow from the energy they had expended. Though tired, their solemn expressions held pride in what they had protected. Master Keenum turned to Amuri with gratitude. You have shown that the synergy between living glyphs and mortals can illuminate and protect. The library owes you a debt that words scarcely convey. The ancient scholar paused to steady himself on his staff, but a new era follows. The threat Hazim posed will not simply vanish. There will be others seeking to exploit these powers. We must remain vigilant. Miret crouched in feline elegance nearby. Amunet stood tall, with wings partially outstretched. They seemed to nod in silent accord. By revealing their synergy, they had forged a deeper bond. It became clear that the living glyphs would not remain mere silent carvings for centuries on end. They would be active participants in maintaining the world's balance. If scribes like Hazim could twist knowledge, perhaps it was time for guardians who would ensure it remained pure. Drifting among them, lesser glyphs, shaped like tiny scarabs, carried fragments of broken scrolls to be repaired. The lion and ibis glyphs moved to help direct these smaller companions. Elsewhere, scrollkeeper Mendisi carefully scooped up the last drifting ashes of a fallen falcon glyph, collecting them in a small clay urn. I will place these remains where their memory endures, he whispered, voice full of reverence. Even in the heartbreak of loss, the guardians honored each other's valor. From the urn, faint sparks of gold flickered, perhaps a final parting, or an echo of the glyph's spirit. Later that evening, as the moon climbed high over the desert, the library seemed to breathe in unison with its renewed defenders. A calm overcame the place where only hours before chaos had reigned. The keepers extinguished some of the torches, allowing the moonlight to illuminate corridors where hieroglyphs, tired from the day's battles, returned to their places in the walls. Yet they did not vanish entirely. Each glyph left behind a subtle imprint, an acknowledgement that they remained watchful and ready. Whispers of gratitude passed among them, exchanging good wishes for a well-deserved rest. Amori stood on a balcony overlooking the desert. In her hands, she held the emerald amulet that had played a pivotal role in saving them all. The eye of Horus gleamed faintly, as though it recognized it had fulfilled its purpose for now. She wondered what new challenges might soon breach the horizon. For a place that guarded the heart of written knowledge, that question was far from trivial. At least for tonight, the library remained secure. Its living glyphs, brought to life by divine gifts and guided by keepers with pure intentions, would stand guard against all who sought to tarnish the wisdom within. Turning away from the sight of the moonlit dunes, Amuri walked back to join Master Kenham in the library's central chamber, where they would finish the thorough inventory of every last manuscript and seal away the corruption introduced by Hazim's scraps of evil. She reflected on the day's events and felt a stirring hope. The synergy between mortal and hieroglyph, scholar and guardian, had proven unbreakable. Though their enemy was formidable, their unity was mightier. Amori paused before a great wall thick with rows of etched figures. Even in the dim lamplight, she could imagine the living glyphs breathing beneath their surfaces, each one prepared to awaken again. Gently placing her hand against the limestone, she whispered her thanks. A soft glow radiated from the carved lines in response. Only then, in that joined moment of ashen aftermath and rising healing, did she fully grasp her destiny, to be the voice and ally of those ancient guardians who defended truths that transcended time. And if ever again the desert winds howled with the memory of twisted runes or a power-hungry scribe, she would answer alongside the living glyphs, ready to protect the sacred library and the knowledge woven into its every stone.